Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. Need to get a motion to go into the 70th special session, please.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. So, there's two good things we get to do today. My first off is we're going to swear in our new city administrator. And then we're going to swear in our new director of human resources. So I would like to get Scott Nicemoyer up here with anybody you choose to have with you, Scott. Everybody, come on, yeah. Mr. Corbin.
That was close. I was thinking about it.
Okay, well, I have to say that I think we've got a record here during this administration that I can ever remember to have two city administrators in one administration, and a interim city administrator. But I have to tell you that I am extremely confident in Scott Nicemoyer and his ability to carry out the vision of this council and this administration. And he proved it to us during the interview that without a doubt we picked the right person. And I want to congratulate you first off again for stepping up and taking this position. So I want you to raise your right hand. Repeat after me. I, Scott A. Nicemoyer,
I, Scott A. Nicemoyer,
do swear
do swear
to support the Constitution of the United States
to support the Constitution of the United States
and to be faithful
and to be faithful
and bear true allegiance
and bear true allegiance
to the state of Maryland
to the state of Maryland
and support the Constitution
and support the Constitution
and laws thereof
and laws thereof
and the charter and ordinances
and the charters and ordinances
of the city of Hagerstown.
of the city of Hagerstown.
And I will,
And I will,
to the best of my skill and judgment,
to the best of my skill and judgment,
diligently and faithfully,
diligently and faithfully,
execute the office of city administrator
execute the office of city administrator
according to the Constitution
according to the Constitution
and the laws of this state.
and the laws of this state.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So we got a free pen for you, because I'm sure you don't have enough of them.
Yeah, I'll just add it to the collection.
And your certificate of qualification. Before we take a picture with this, you want to say anything?
You know me, I'll always say something. Just thanks, everybody. 15 years here, I couldn't ask for a better bunch of people to work with, starting with City Administrator Bruce Zimmerman, who I started with Valerie, of course, with Mike Spiker, who I help attribute even being here in the first place to Mike. He was one of the first ones that I talked to before I came here. To all my friends, all my IT crew. Tim's been with me the longest. We've been here since the inception, and just proud to say that I can represent some of the finest people on the planet that work here at the city. And I thank the mayor and council for giving me this opportunity, and of course my family that are going to be prepared to put up with this. Hopefully they can, they'll understand. I think they will. And just thanks all. I know all of you are here for the stadium, so that's great.
We got a good crowd for you.
Yeah, and that's why we scheduled it that way, so somebody'd show up. But again, just thank you, everybody.
scoot down to the middle
What do you think?
there. Eric, I want
You want that one
I
that
want a
way?
solo of this guy, because I'll never see him in a suit and tie.
That too. That too, actually.
Let's see, can we get this group tired?
How about we put the wife and Scott together? And you guys hold this.
The parents?
And I'm gonna stand back here in the back. You guys get up there to the front.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, since they're shorter, maybe we can.
All right.
Okay, make sure everybody can see the camera.
That's good. Yeah, I'll be it. I'll just
Okay.
my face and be like a photobomb.
There we go. Hey, good smiles, everybody. 1, 2, 3. Let's do one more just for safety. Good big smiles. 1, 2, 3. Okay.
Got it. Need you to sign. All right, moving on. The next person we're going to swear in is Donald C. Francis. He's our new HR director. He was our HR director before. And I have to tell you that when I heard that he was an applicant this time, I was very excited. So I know you did a fantastic job when you were here before, and we were sorry to lose you then. We're glad to welcome you back to the family. And I appreciate you putting in for this position and accepting. It's good to have you. Anybody want to have one? All right, raise your right hand. Repeat after me. I, Donald C. Francis,
I, Donald C. Francis,
do swear
do swear
to support the Constitution of the United States
to support the Constitution of the United States
and to be faithful
and to be faithful
and bear true allegiance
and bear true allegiance
to the state of Maryland
to the state of Maryland
and support the Constitution
and support the Constitution
and laws thereof
and laws thereof
and the charter and ordinances
and the charter and ordinances
of the city of Hagerstown.
of the city of Hagerstown.
And I will,
And I will,
to the best of my skill and judgment,
to the best of my skill and judgment,
diligently and faithfully,
diligently and faithfully,
without partiality or prejudice,
without partiality and prejudice,
execute the office of HR Director
execute the office of the HR Director
according to the Constitution
according to the Constitution
and the laws of this state.
and the laws of this state.
Congratulations.
We'll leave that to the boss.
There you go. Once you sign the book here, sign your name. Let me do it.
One, two, three. One more. Good smiles. 1, 2, 3.
All right, so coming out of special session, going into the work session, that's for you.
Thank you.
I didn't have time to put a piece of paper on there and say Scott. We have two proclamations. One is for Bike Month and the other is for Pre-Eclampsia Awareness Month. Who's going to accept the Bike Month? Rodney?
I am not sure.
Rodney, who's going to accept the Bike Month? Okay, come on. How you doing?
Good to see you.
Proclamation, National Bike Month, May 2019. National Bike to Work Day, May 17th, 2019. Whereas millions of Americans engage in cycling because it is a viable and environmentally sound form of transportation, as well as an excellent form of physical fitness. And whereas National Bike Month and National Bike to Work Day increase public awareness for bicycling, educate the community about the benefits of bicycling for transportation and recreation purposes, and encourage people to try bicycle commuting. And whereas the city of Hagerstown now has over 54 miles of shared use paths, bike lanes, and designated bike routes where cyclists can visit our parks and historic neighborhoods safely by riding a bicycle. Now, therefore, the city of Hagerstown proclaims May 19th, May 2019 as National Bike Month, and May 17, 2019 as National Bike to Work Day, and encourages all citizens to participate in our Bicycle Advisory Committee's events in May to help raise awareness and promote health in our community. The city of Hagerstown encourages citizens to recognize the importance of sharing our streets with cyclists and encourages citizens to utilize the city's many bike routes.
Thank you very much, Mayor and Council, for supporting the Bicycle Advisory Group over the past 10 years, 11 years, something like that. It's been a long time. We've really worked hard to try to get bicycling safe in the community, and along with all the bike routes, safe bike routes that we have been able to do. And we have, I think, our 4th iteration of the bike map for the city of Hagerstown, because it's been growing like crazy. So we do have some bike rides scheduled. I'm sure some of you have probably seen this poster out. But tomorrow night is the Crumpy's Donut Ride. And I know everybody in here loves Crumpy Donut. So I would suggest get your bicycles out, meet us out at the fairgrounds. It's going to be 6:30, and we're going to stop at Crumpy's Donuts on the way, get a free donut, and then continue back to the fairgrounds. So thank you very much, and I appreciate it very much for all you've done.
The next proclamation is for Pre-Eclampsia Awareness Month, May 2019. I have to tell you a little bit on the personal side of this. My wife had preeclampsia back with our first child, and they put her in the hospital, and she was in there for probably about 10 days before she had our son Robert. And that was it was scary because the first time, going through that, we had no idea. So this means a lot. Who's going to accept the? Please come up. Hi. Okay, proclamation, Preeclampsia Awareness Month, May 2019. Whereas preeclampsia, including HELLP syndrome and eclampsia, is a dangerous condition of pregnancy that can, in its severest form, lead to maternal and/or infant mortality or premature birth with significant health risk for the mother and baby. And whereas preeclampsia affects 3 to 4% of pregnancies in the United States and 4 to 5% of pregnancies worldwide, there are 6.5 deaths in every 10,000 cases of preeclampsia. And whereas public education as to the signs and symptoms of preeclampsia, HELLP syndrome, and eclampsia can help women recognize the condition and seek appropriate medical care. And whereas prenatal education should include recognition of those signs and symptoms: spikes in maternal blood pressure, sudden swelling of the face and hands, severe upper abdominal pain, blurred vision, persistent headaches, breathlessness. And whereas many citizens of Hagerstown have joined the Preeclampsia Foundation to raise public awareness in order to minimize maternal and infant illness and death due to preeclampsia. Now therefore, I, Robert E. Brucci II, Mayor of the City of Hagerstown, Maryland, do hereby proclaim May 2019 as Preeclampsia Awareness Month in Hagerstown, Maryland, and support the Preeclampsia Foundation's efforts to reduce maternal and infant illness and mortality due to preeclampsia and related hypertensive disorders of pregnancy. Signed by me. You want to say a few words?
Thanks. For us, it really hit home about a year ago whenever my daughter was pregnant and ended up giving birth 2 months premature. And we were at great risk of losing her and my grandson. Preeclampsia has been around for a very long time, and it's something that still to this day is misdiagnosed. And having education in the community, not just with the pregnant women who need to know their bodies, but again, when it's your first pregnancy, you don't know your body. And so it's extremely scary. So it has to become very, very well known and understood how this disease works with pregnant women by the facilities that are, looking at our young mothers and everything like that. So it's just very important to me. The support that we've received through the community has just been phenomenal, and we've got well over 70 walkers right now, and we've raised a little over $6,500. So the walk is on Saturday. If anyone is able to come out, we'd love to have you come out. There's a Facebook site. If anyone has any questions about it, please feel free to call me. The walk is at the Fairgrounds Park. It's at the South Pavilion. It's next to the dog park. So it starts at 9 o'clock and registration begins at 7:30. So, but all the information is on the website, Preeclampsia Foundation, Promise Walk of Hagerstown. Please feel free to give me a call, email me or anything if you have any questions. Thank you.
Sure, yeah, please, go ahead.
So this is my daughter, and this is my grandson.
Good camera. Hey. Give a good big smile. 1, 2, 3. Let's try to get more. 1, 2, 3.
All right, next on the agenda is the Maryland Stadium Authority release of market analysis and site assessment proposed new MiLB ballpark. Stadium Authority presentation. Al Tyler from the Maryland Stadium Authority and Susan Seiger from Crossroads Consulting. Please come up to the table. I know Dan Spedden wanted to be here this evening. He has a family emergency and he won't be able to join us. So.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. Thank you for having us. My name is Al Tyler. I'm with the Maryland Stadium Authority. Pleased to be here to present our findings for the market and site assessment study related to a new minor league baseball stadium in Hagerstown. In June 2018, we entered into a memorandum of understanding to conduct the study. We engaged our consultant, Crossroads Consulting, out of Tampa, Florida. Susie Seeger is the principal of that organization, and we also engaged Populous to take part in the site assessment study. Susie can talk to Crossroads, but just to give a little background on Populous, Populous is a industry leader in stadiums and sports and entertainment venues around the world. So we have a really good team, and I'm going to let Susie present her findings.
Great. Good afternoon. I'm going to make this technology work. Just to go through really what our driving forces were, the purpose of the study is to look at a proposed new ballpark that would replace Municipal Stadium, which was originally constructed in 1930. It's one of the oldest stadiums in minor league baseball, currently home to the Suns, owned by the city but operated by the team. And while the stadium has undergone some renovations, it still lacks modern amenities that most fans expect today at other similar ballparks. So the three main focus points for the study were to retain, as we were given by the city, were to retain a minor league baseball team, to accommodate diverse usage, and generate economic activity in the community as an urban core renewal project. Just an overview of what we did as part of our work plan. First was really to get input from stakeholders, folks from the city, folks from the team, folks from economic development, potential users, people that operate facilities in the area, just to get a little bit of a lay of the land, and then understand our local market conditions. So by that, it's really looking at trends in population and income and households. What's your accessibility? Again, what are area facilities? Because with any new project, you want it to be complementary to your other assets in the community and not competitive. So that was really one of the areas we wanted to focus on, particularly for non-baseball activity. Is there a gap that maybe this facility could help fill? And then a minor league baseball analysis. So in that, we're looking at different things. You don't want to look at this in a vacuum. You want to understand how is all of minor league baseball performing, how is the class in which your team plays, and the league. So that looks at various factors in terms of demographics, stadium characteristics, and attendance. And then, as Al mentioned, we retained Populous on our team to look at potential site locations and evaluate those. Again, and we'll talk about it more as we go through that, one of the objectives was certainly to make this project categorized as an urban core renewal project, and that will dictate some of the sites that we go through. And then lastly, to summarize our findings, which is the objective of today's overview. So real quick, when we look at this, we want to understand what's our primary market. And for this, we've identified that as the MSA, which is really Washington County and Maryland, and a couple counties in West Virginia. There's different ways you can look at this. It's too small from where you're drawing your fans. It's definitely larger than the city. It's definitely larger than the county. And some people look at a 30-minute drive, a 30-mile radius, but we really think this is where your core folks are going to come from with any new project. And so you'll see the primary highway access is Interstate 81, north and south, and then I-70, east and west. This is just a snapshot, a little busy, and if your vision's good, it'll be even better for you. But really, again, we want to understand our market. So as you'll see, the MSA is growing. It's relatively young. It's pretty equal to all of the profiled areas. Its income, median income, household income of about $57,500 is in line with the county, lower than the state, but somewhat similar to the U.S. So again, we have a growing population, a good age for our target market, and the characteristics, the income, somewhat moderate, but again, close to our surrounding areas. As I said, we want to look at what is minor league baseball doing as a whole. It's really proven to be a stable product over the long term. I wouldn't say that it is recession-proof, but one of the things that it has been able to do is certainly withstand those challenging economic times better than other industries. One of the reasons is most people really consider it one of the most affordable forms of professional sports entertainment. And the interesting thing about minor league baseball is that each team is affiliated with a major league team, and that team is actually responsible for paying the salaries of those players and those expenses. So frankly, the ownership really wants to focus on making an experience and focusing on entertainment. More so than sports. In fact, if you ask a lot of people, we were just having this conversation, when they leave, what's the score of the game, there's actually very few that understand what the score of the game is. But they can tell you who the mascot was and what the giveaway was and all those. So it's a little bit different dichotomy than some industries. But in general, minor league baseball as a whole has certainly been successful, even with some small dips over time. The second area we want to look at is the South Atlantic League, where the Suns currently play. Over the 10-year profile period, the league in aggregate has averaged 3.1 million people per year. That went down a little bit in 2010 when the number of teams decreased from 16 to 14. But again, if you look at the trends, fairly consistent over time. In summary, a couple things. One, as I mentioned earlier, the stadium is one of the oldest in minor league baseball. Second oldest in the South Atlantic League, or the Sally. Its capacity is about 4,600, which ranks 11 out of 14 teams. Excluding our stadium, the average seating capacity is about 5,680. Several of the teams, in fact, 6 of the teams play in stadiums that were built before 2000, similar to ours. But one of the things we looked at was, again, how does our attendance compare to those? So the table on there shows the Class A average over that 10-year period. Season attendance is about 196,000. Sally's about 219, and the Suns has been about 90,000. So there's definitely an opportunity to increase that. And then looking at the average attendance, all of A is about 3,000, about 3,300, South Atlantic, and about 1,400. One of the smallest markets. Interestingly, market size is not the only correlation. Again, a lot of it is actually weather. But also the giveaways, and also, again, what do we have to offer our fans? Because it's just like going to the movies or going to the bowling alley. It just happens to be a baseball game. So one of the things that we wanted to understand with management at peer facilities, which are those that are newer stadiums, is where do they identify these success factors? And it's pretty consistent. One is you want to make sure that all of your space is very flexible. Both the stadium seating, the different types of seating, the pricing points, all of that, but also inside, so that you can host some community events and host some meetings and host some board functions or banquets. The food and beverage, that's another area. You want people to eat at your ballpark. You want to offer local different food types at different price points. But the big thing is there needs to really be a true integration between the team and the stadium owner. And we want to make sure that it's really looked at as a community asset, and that you're trying to be involved and really not just look at it as baseball, but what else can we do from a non-baseball perspective. Clearly, the field's important. It's a common operating model for the team to operate the stadium, even if it may be municipally owned. But again, that strong partnership, and also one of the success factors, and this is where a little bit of the challenge comes with the existing stadium, is you really want to make sure you have a long-term strategic approach to capital improvements, both short-term and long-term. It's great to build the asset, but we have to make sure that we're keeping up with it over time. So in summary, from the market assessment perspective, minor league baseball is a very stable sport. You have a growing population base. The area that we looked at is a potential downtown location, which has some synergies, both with existing assets, but also your continuing planning efforts. Obviously, a new stadium would allow you a lot more marketability and options for your fans. The other thing is, when you look at it on the flip side of some of those challenges, there's always money is always an issue. So we want to make sure that we're engaging the local community, but that support, especially at the corporate level, is also a challenge. We mentioned a little bit on the median household income, although it's close to surrounding areas. It's a little lower than a lot of the other teams. The supply of area facilities, again, we want to be complementary, but everybody is going for the same consumer's discretionary dollar. So that's always going to be a challenge. And then just anything that can happen with the macro economic conditions is always a factor in any of these major projects. So when we look at it, and this is very preliminary at the market planning stage, but we're looking at about 164,4 for total attendance. You remember we were somewhere around 90, so a pretty significant increase. But the other thing is there's a lot of opportunities to do additional events, some festivals, some consumer shows, some social functions, some community events that we think could be around 27,000 additional people. Again, preliminary, and will continue to evolve as decisions are made in terms of the operations. So moving on to the site assessment, Populous analyzed 3 potential sites. When we started, there were actually 8 site locations, and they did an independent assessment of that and really narrowed it down to 3 sites that met the parameters that we were given, again, particularly in terms of urban core renewal, economic activity, and community usage. And so we refer to these as the Baltimore Street site, the Market House site, and the Center Parking Lot site. And we'll show you a graphic in that in a minute. So as we go to evaluate these, we really have to have a test program And this was developed by Populous, and it is pretty consistent with most of the newer stadiums. So we looked at a seating capacity of 5,000 with 8 to 10 suites. So that requires a parcel of about 5.5 acres. And so that program was put on all of these potential sites to help evaluate the differentials between them. What is the criteria that Populous used? One is the physical site factors, the site procurement, how many parcels is it that we would have to get, and how easy or difficult could that be? What is the vehicular access and parking? You'll see no site is perfect in terms of parking. Some are better than others, and that's always going to be a challenge in downtown at any level of a sports facility. And then some urban design issues. So this is a visual of the 3 sites. The top one is the Market House site. Bottom left is Baltimore Street site, and center parking lot site to the bottom right. And just to give you a little bit better idea, this is where the Baltimore Street site is. Bordered by Baltimore, Jonathan Streets. The Market House site, again, that's more northeast of that. Again, moving down Jonathan Street, closer to Franklin Street, you'll see the Market House, so that'll give you a little bit of an idea of where that is. Again, this is a 6-acre site, so it can accommodate the footprint. And the last site is center parking lot site. Again, 5.5 acres, so no problem with the site. You'll see that the central lot is right in the middle of it, so it's going to displace some parking. We'll go through this in a little more detail. But again, to give you a frame of reference of where these sites are. This slide I know is a little hard to read, but it is really showing you the evaluation matrix and the scoring results. So again, with physical site factors, we want to understand, does it fit? What's the topography? What's the potential for expansion? Utilities, what's existing, what would have to be relocated, and environmental issues. Site procurement, as I talked about, how many properties are we looking at? Is the parking adequate? And then what's its compatibility? How does it relate to existing amenities, both those that are in place now, but also those that are planned for the future? So if you look at the bottom, the scoring, Baltimore Street site achieved the highest score with 53. Market House site was 50. And then Central Parking Lot site scored 45. So you'll see, and this is very detailed in the report, for instance, the Market House site has 12 properties that would need to be acquired to make that fit. The Central Parking site has 21 or 27 parcels that would need to be. So you'll see that that's one issue. The other is in terms of parking, as I mentioned. The other 2 sites would need to, they're about 600 plus shy of what you would like, whereas the Baltimore Street site is only about 300, 330 shy. So this slide is meant to illustrate why the Baltimore Street site ranked highest. Again, keeping in those same categories, it was 6.25 acres, so it's plenty for the initial construction and potential expansion. Not a lot, but it does have the largest site area. The topography actually allows for a cost-effective bowl-on-grade construction approach, so that could result in a cost savings. And it appears to have the fewest utility conflicts. In terms of procurement, as I mentioned, it's a relatively small amount of parcels, about 6. They are more expensive than some of the others in terms of assessed value. And it's zoned city center mixed use. And then from the parking, as I mentioned, a rule of thumb is 3 people per car, so you want about 67 spaces. And so the Baltimore site gives you about 1,300, so as I mentioned, you're about 360 shy, but by far the closest. And those can certainly be made up by private parking or on-street parking. And then the last area really is looking at the urban design issues. So, one of the concerns was that it looks like it would potentially interfere with some of the improvements on the existing arch trail. But our architects think it actually provides a good opportunity where we could integrate the ballpark into that and make it more of a part of it. So that, that was one issue that they wanted to make sure we could solve, because we see that as a big asset for the downtown. Its location on the edge allows it the opportunity to not be a super block where it takes everything up, because it's more on the edge of town versus some of those other that are more centrally located. And the other thing from an urban design perspective is that it really encourages people to walk through the heart of downtown, especially if they have to use some of that as parking. So that is just some of the highlights. Again, this is well documented in the full report. And this is just to give you an idea of the site to the left and how a ballpark might fit on that site using those programmatic parameters that we outlined earlier. And the last slide to wrap up is with any type of these, this study really focused on the initial market assessment, but more importantly, the site assessment. And, financial considerations are certainly an important part of any project. So the next steps really focus around, one, securing a long-term agreement with the team and facility operator, reaching consensus on the site location that best meets the city's goals. I've conveyed them to you as they were conveyed to me, but we have certainly worked for projects where the best site is not the most affordable site. So it may not be the best site if you can't put it together. So that'll be certainly the next step for the community. And then when that site is decided to, move forward and start looking at acquisition of different parcels. And then we really want to further refine this. Again, this is a test program, and come up with a cost estimate. What are we looking at? Ballparks now are all over the board in terms of range. Probably somewhere for sure between 35 and 45 is just a guess of what some of the newer ones have been built. And then we want to understand what are our potential funding strategies? How can we do this? And with any economic development project, we certainly want to try to leverage our public investment to maximize private investment. So we want to try to attract that private investment sooner than later, and not just on the site itself, but on ancillary development, so that can potentially help, again, other economic development initiatives in downtown. And with that, I will open it up to any questions.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
What would be our next
Yeah,
step?
what's our next step?
Well, city administrator and myself discussed today about what we should actually do next, and one of those things is to give the council about probably about a month to digest all this information. And then, because we know that phase two funding has been secured by Delegate Quarterman, that money won't be available till July 1st. So if we come back in June and have the opportunity to digest this information and then base a decision to move forward on phase two.
But Bob, just so I understand what you're saying, and I know Delegate Quarterman is here, and I appreciate his presence, and he's reached out to all of us, and I just want to make sure that I understand it, that he secured funding for the entire phase two, so that we want to go forward with phase two?
We don't know exactly what the cost of phase two will be yet. We do know it was mentioned between the 300 and 400,000 range, but we also know that we have a lot of information that they can use from 2012 that could reduce that cost.
Especially if you're talking about Baltimore Street.
Right, if that's a
Okay.
location.
That's-
Well, I mean, even if it's not Baltimore Street, the point is that it incorporates, in 2012, incorporates a lot of information
Right.
about the surrounding area from 2012.
Sure.
But that'll be,
I have a question as to who made this study to be an urban core project, because I was under the impression that we were supposed to be looking at the entire city of Hagerstown to find suitable areas.
there were 8 sites looked at, correct?
Yes, originally, yep. There were 8 sites that were looked at, and that was one of the driving forces that we were given, would this have an opportunity to be an urban core renewal project? And so some of the sites didn't work for that reason alone, but, frankly, there was not the exact rating system to this amount of detail on those other sites, but some, from our architect's perspective, kind of fell off for other reasons. including just the site area itself made it very difficult, and you could tell very expensive to construct. The other was just the parking dynamics there were not nearly as favorable for where you could get that 3-to-1 ratio. So some of those factors, but they toured and looked at and did a cursory review of all 8 of the sites that we were given from the city.
So I think it's important for me to say first to the citizens that are bothering to watch this, we don't have a copy of the information. We don't have a report. I haven't spoken to you for, I don't know, 8 months since the brief interview in the room next to us as it applies to your process of analysis. I mean, I think it's a pretty fair statement. So I'm just going on what you just put up on the board.
Sure.
So that's as much as we have this evening. What I do have, though, and I want to get some clarity on 2 items, and I'm sure I got other questions, but the first is I have the memorandum of understanding between the city and the Stadium Authority. I have a copy of the proposal from Crossroads Consulting Services, and I have a letter that the city sent acknowledging the parameters of the analysis back in March of 2018. And so there are 4 items. And one is preliminary due diligence through a kickoff meeting between the Stadium Authority and the City of Hagerstown representatives and obtaining feedback from various stakeholders. I didn't participate in that. I'm assuming that occurred. Number 2 is a market analysis. Number 3 is a facility program and site analysis for up to 3 sites to be studied. That's in the parentheses. And the 4th is a summary of findings presented to the mayor and council at a work session, which I'm assuming this is that item. Nowhere in the memorandum of understanding, in the letter of communication from the city, or in the Crossroads Consulting Report, does it ever use the words urban core as the parameters of the analysis. So I'm just curious, as Councilmember Keller pointed out, how we arrived at limiting it, 1, to that area, and 2, to the 3 locations within some independently defined area.
Sure. So, as you know, we engaged and we were asked to look at 8 sites. Our architect was engaged during all of those kickoff meetings and all that stuff, and as Susie alluded to, we did tour all 8 sites. And based on experience and observation, these 3 sites were picked for that reason. There was one site that sat on top of a hill. There was another site that sat down in a gully that had a lot of water problems. It just made certain sites, topography and physical characteristics, just made some of those sites not feasible to look at.
No one
So-
ever said, don't look at any sites
So,
around the interstates
but-
or any of that.
No. So we were given the 8 sites to look at, and that's what we did. Part of the driving force behind this project, and any project like this, is you need some sort of economic development or opportunity for economic development around. So the 3 sites that were picked weren't picked specifically for that reason, but that is a factor to be able to do that. One thing of importance that you should know, and I didn't point out earlier, is our mission in doing these studies is to provide independent advice to state, or actually local, and then state leadership. So that's what we do. We don't advocate for or against projects of this type at all. So these 3 sites were the sites that were jointly agreed to. They were the ones that were studied. Our consultants feel strongly that they're the strongest 3 sites of the 8 that were presented. And quite possibly, we've been through the city more than once, and quite honestly, those 3 sites are strong sites.
Okay. Move on to sort of the next question. I know that you have indicated some preference to the Baltimore Street Summit Avenue site, which I can tell you is not shocking at all. I figured that's what was going to happen.
There's no preference.
No preference.
So-
It's just based on an analysis.
And I asked this question several months ago. In that process of analysis, and whether it's Central Lot, which is full of cars, a good bit of the time, or the YMCA site, which has, a really big old building on it, or even Summit Avenue, Baltimore Street, which we obviously have a bit more information on. So I heard you mention earlier the relationship to the cultural trail. So the city has invested, I'm going to estimate at this point, probably about $2.5 million into that area associated with that cultural trail at this point. And I heard your comment, as I've heard from others, that logistically, it could be incorporated into this site. And I'm assuming there's a map somewhere that will be provided as part of this analysis, which will show the footprint, the basic footprint of a stadium on top of the existing lineage of the cultural trail.
Yeah, you have that. So that was one of the slides that were in the report.
We don't have
I
a report.
understand. It is, the report is public through our website now, and accessible there. I really strongly think that you should read that and understand all the data that's in there. If you have any questions, you can certainly call us. But, this presentation was a boiled down version of what's in the full report, so.
The other question is, I think you said that site is about 300 some odd spaces, parking spaces short. So when I look at that, the major parking lot's right in the infield. So where is the other parking for the?
So,
1,500?
I don't actually have a map of that, but in the report, you'll see there's a map of all of the city-owned parking lots. And so we have that inventory, and then we have what the differential would be, because as you mentioned, one's gonna take a pretty significant amount of that. So that shows that gap. There's no one that makes the 667 within a half mile to that. So the short term, and there is not enough room on this site to do a ballpark and a structured parking lot. So it would have to be made up either through private lots or through street parking, or it would be outside that half mile radius.
So it'd be incorporating the central lot and the university lot.
Yeah, and there's an inventory with all the lots that were within that radius and the number of spaces.
When will we know the cost of the phase two?
Well, I believe we'll know the cost of phase two. We may make a decision to move on to phase two, and then we'll get.
So once we're engaged, if we're engaged, we will refine scope and then
That'll
start
be
to
another
refine
memorandum.
price after that. Yeah. So we've identified a budget range, but once we define scope, we'll be able to do that better.
And I believe it was mentioned that a phase two actually probably couldn't begin until fall.
Phase two is a new engagement, so it's the same process. So it would be a request from the city, certainly approval by our board to do that. We would negotiate a new MOU to undertake that, and then we would go through a procurement to bring on specific consultants, environmental, traffic, the rest of the scope, and then move forward there. So that takes a little bit of time to get that team in place.
And the report on your website is available to the public as of?
Right now. It's live.
So you released it today.
It got released today.
Any other questions for our guest?
Thank you for
What's
having me.
what's the web address?
It's Maryland Stadium Authority, so www.mdstad.com. It'll be under the Projects and Studies tab, Current Studies.
Okay, thanks.
I don't have any other questions.
Yeah.
Great.
We'll also put a link on the city page, so
That'll
that
make it
we
easy.
just
Yeah,
make it
sure.
easy for people too.
Yep, absolutely.
IT guy.
IT, it's outside of mine.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Give me a- third week of June date.
They're mostly people that don't live in the city.
Yeah.
So here's the ballpark. Here's the drive.
They sent an email from the 47th
Here's
about
the
our,
ballpark.
seriously, 47, 3 minutes ago, they sent an email releasing our.
I know, it's supposed to work that way. You're not supposed to be informed. That's how this process works. This is the corner. This is the corner. Which means so if this is this building here, is this one way down here, right? All right.
All right, we'll put it on the work session for June 11th to make a determination to either go on to phase 2. Okay? That gives you about a month to.
When will it be?
June 11th. That'll give you about a month.
It does.
Well, we'll give you a month to look at
There's one
everything.
tomorrow.
Sitting at this table.
All right. All right, moving on then, we're going to the fiscal year 20 budget review.
Good evening. Good, how's everybody? So I think we're gonna just touch base real quick on where we left off last time, and we had one thing I think that was still unresolved, and that was the discussion around the general agency fund, agency contributions. And so attached to the memo, either as a second page or on the back side, we have included again what agencies that were included in the fiscal year 20 proposed budget, and then a column that literally listed potential changes and then where we would end. But there were questions around, I think, CRS specifically because there was a discussion on whether we were going to reduce the proposed contribution from 44,000 down to 25,100. As part of the process on the agency contributions, they sent in information annually. So they'll send a copy of their actual audit as well as financial statements. Some of these larger groups will also send a budget, but again, not every organization is large enough to do that. But based on the information that we had received, CRS in fiscal year 18 ended the year with a total fund balance of $4.65 million. And of that total, unrestricted and undesignated was $3.2 million of the 4.6. They did have reported a loss in fiscal year 18 in operations of $84,000. And then the other two things I just want to point out is both the city of Hagerstown and Washington County both contribute and provide contributions. The city's in fiscal year 18 was $45,000. Washington County's was $788,000. So based on that information, does that help us make a decision on whether to go ahead and keep this proposed reduction in so that additional monies could be given to the Maryland Theater?
I'm fine.
I think we're all in like a railroad shock right now. I'm fine.
Me too. Understood.
I will only add, the people at this table know that I made a funding request to the Board of County Commissioners regarding fire at our volunteer stations and some other issues. And I did get a response, and it was pretty much no. And I heard through the, yeah, me too. I heard through the grapevine, one of the reasons they're going to give is because we are cutting funding to CRS while they're trying to take it over and then coming with our handout at the same time. So I just wanted to make the body aware of that
We're
argument.
just asking for our fire stations to be funded the same as every other fire station.
I get it. I'm just letting you guys know.
So we're going to move forward. We're going to hit a couple of capital projects this evening, hopefully, and finish out with CDBG if we can get it squeezed in. We will reconvene next week and start with economic redevelopment because I don't want to try to hurry and rush because we still do have time left to continue to review. And maybe what we do is we go ahead and have Rodney come up so that we can look at two of the major projects that are included in fiscal year 20 budget and out years. There's two that I can think of, and Ronnie, if you want, I'll share mine. Here, if you have notes in yours. The first is the Hagerstown Cultural Trail, and this, I was hoping that we could cover a couple of the bigger projects. By no means can we sit here and cover them all, because it would take months to go through every single project. But the Hagerstown Cultural Trail is in section 7 with the rest of all of our capital projects, and it's on page 62. Of course, we know that it's been constructed in several different phases, so Rodney, you don't need to be quiet, so you can cover what we have in fiscal year 20 budget.
In fiscal year 20, there is $500,000 for Phase 2, which would be the continuation of the trail from Antietam Street to Washington Street, and that would be incorporated as part of the UIP Plaza, which is a separate CIP I think we're going to talk about in a second. There's $210,000 for the other end of the trail at 319 Summit, which we've talked about before, and that's just funding that's consistent with all the discussions we've had before. And there's $250,000 of CDBG money in there for a splash pad too, which I want to come talk to you about in more detail about location and things in the next month or so.
So the trail continues to progress. Again, there's 3 different distinct phases. We tried to list them so that everybody was aware. We've included language in there because we were looking at needing to go ahead and do some future bond issues. So underneath budget impact, we're indicating that, you know, for $185,000 in bond money, it would cost us about $14,000 to $15,000 a year to pay that back. But there's a lot of different funding sources. It's very fluid. It's
Still
ever
working,
progressing, yes.
And
It's
we're
not
still applying for grants as we speak.
Yes, actually, we just had that conversation today.
Yep.
So it's not a project that's one and done and finished and we moved on.
The scary thing about it is, are we going to bulldoze what we do here for a ballpark?
No.
Not in that section anyway. That section that we're talking about in this coming fiscal year is from Antietam to Washington. That has nothing at all to do with between Antietam and Baltimore streets.
Well, I'm not interested in bulldozing any part of the.
Well, I'm not interested in bulldozing any of it either. I'm interested in incorporating it. Go on, guys.
So the next portion of that is the Urban Improvement Plaza. So on page 120 in section 7, again, this is a little bit separate and goes back to bigger picture and the urban improvement project that is happening and continues to happen throughout downtown Hagerstown with all the different partners. The plaza portion is one of the portions that the city is most directly involved in and managing and overseeing the project portion. Ronnie's already spent about $900,000.
Correct. Yeah, under putting the overhead utilities underground.
So just in getting all the wires gone and put underground, which is a big improvement, it was $900,000. That was the first phase, and that occurred in fiscal year 19. That was a combination of a bond issue and grant monies. So then for fiscal year 20?
Is 1.2 million. It's, again, a kind of pulling together many sources of funds, from program open space to potential bond bills to community legacy funds to some city money. But this is the construction of the plaza that's behind the Maryland Theater that connects over to where the university system building is, the expansion of the university system. It kind of once and for all solves the problem of the trucks behind the Maryland Theater, but it also provides services to the Barbara Ingram School, like trash trucks, other supplies that they'll need to get. It also allows for school buses to drop off back there. So I say the plaza's going to wear many hats, and I think the last hat it could have then is one that is just public events. I could see like 5Ks being staged there to start down the cultural trail, or any other events that could gather, you know, a few hundred people.
So there's still more work to do there.
Yes. The schedule would be that we go out to bids in October, hopefully have you award a contract in December, start construction early next year, and have it done by June would be the goal.
And then I think just the last one we want to touch on while Rodney is here, and it's one that he's already discussed probably back in the fall. And that's specifically Pangbourne Lake reconstruction. I think one of the reasons why we want to touch upon it, it's on page 107 and 108. The current bond that we are getting ready to close in just a few short weeks does include funding for this, which was $1 million. But I think one of the things I found most interesting was during conversations that we have had with our consultants, the Wood Group, and looking at stormwater, is that this specific project has two unique portions and phases. So you're going to see that it's been separated onto two portions. One on page 107, which would just be general fund. On the next page is the portion that's being carved out for stormwater.
So yeah, it's two separate projects. The main project that most people are interested in is the reconstruction of the lake. The perimeter walls are deteriorating. We're going to replace those. Also, we're going to dredge the lake. Some of the lake is probably less than 6 inches deep now because of all the sediment that's gone in it over the years. The second part of the project is the restoration of Hamilton Run adjacent to that, and that's where the stormwater comes in because we can get credits for that for our MS4 permit. That project we hope to bid next month, and I hope to be back here in July or so with a contract for you to award.
Any questions for Rodney? Thank you.
Thank you.
And then I think one of the last ones on the general fund that I'm just going to touch upon, I'm going to ask Chief of War to come and talk about. And this centers around our fire department training center that we currently have over off of Bowman. Thank you, Adam.
So ladies and gentlemen, as you know, the Bowman Avenue site that the city has owned since the mid-60s has a 5-story concrete block tower, small burn building. And if you've been there recently, thanks to Rodney's help, we've done some paving, cleaning up, removing some old rail car props, et cetera, et cetera. Requested $1 million in bond financing in FY20 to complete additional requirements. It is the regional training center that everybody uses for live burns and what I will call a tactical village. The center proposed by Washington County government in Roxbury is classrooms and gymnasium only with no tactical village planned in their 10-year CIP. We're at the point where, due to lack of investment in this site on Bowman Avenue, we just have to do something over the years. What you have in front of you is an example, not the sample, of a 4-story burn building that is constructed out of sea containers and permits live burns on each of the 4 levels of this center with appropriate standards for egress and escape, roof ventilation, and a lot of other things. This facility, or a facility very similar to it, would constitute the lion's share of the $1 million, probably somewhere between $750,000 and $800,000. We have been steadily spending little bits of money to improve that center in every way we can, most recently including the paving as already mentioned, but also want to add showers. Cancer prevention during live burns is one of the riskiest things currently occurring in the service. We've been seeking every opportunity we know of for disposed portable classrooms that we might be able to convert ourselves. Millings are piled up out there. I would invite Mayor and Council to just take a ride by the site. I think it's going to be significantly different than what you've seen before. And we just continue to invest wherever we can, but that's the lion's share of what we need to do, and the sooner the better. What I would say is, and you already know this, firefighting is a team sport. We have classrooms in every one of our facilities that we can get by with classroom space. What we don't have is a tactical village to be able to teach the sets and reps to teams of firefighters to run lines, extinguish fires, throw ladders, and do all the other things required of a efficient fire department.
Who uses our facility now?
Everyone,
Do they contribute funds to it?
they do not.
I knew that,
Some
I just
in-
wanted to ask that out
Oh,
loud.
I'm sorry. Some in-kind services, to be fair, but generally not. As Mayor and Council knows, I've repeatedly asked in my tenure here for some kind of a joint operation there. They've chosen to go their own direction in Roxbury. My concern is that we have really no plan other than classrooms and a gymnasium for the next 10 years.
I mean, we have a gym at the PAL they can use.
I also believe they're not going to be able to burn where they think they're going to be able to burn beside an elementary school and the largest housing development in Washington County.
Well, maybe in the next 2+2, you guys can talk to the county about them spending $7.4 million of county general fund on their sewer and ask for some money there.
I don't think I'm gonna be invited back to the 2x2 meeting. Someone else is gonna have to.
One of the reasons that I wanted Chief to,
Kristen and I have some.
Kristen's not invited either.
I don't think Jim's here, I guess he left.
so one of the reasons I really wanted Chief to come and have an opportunity to discuss this is because probably about 2 years ago, in 2018, when we came forth and were originally doing a bond at that time, we had included money, and we removed it because we felt like we wanted to give Chief the opportunity to really look at, in detail, the exact needs, but also to go back and see what our partners, where they were, how can they contribute. And I feel like we've more than done that due diligence. So we're included in fiscal year 20. It is going to be a future bond issue. If all these other projects move forward that have a future bond issue and we're ready to do it again by the end of calendar 2019 or the beginning of 2020, we'll be bringing this back to ask consideration because we're to the point where we absolutely have to do something.
I would also say that to Councilmember Keller's question, high school kids are dependent upon this facility. That's where they go to burn. That's where we put them through SCBA mazes. And we have partnered with the Boonesboro High School Vote Tech program. They are rebuilding SCBA mazes in modules. We're funding the materials at minimal cost. It's a sunk cost for labor. Their Vote Tech class is 2 at a time over weeks. We'll probably be through the rest of the school year before we have a deliverable, but we picked up our first 2 modules. So we are trying to save money at every opportunity we can, but we also want safe, quality props that are going to stand the test of time and prepare our workforce for what they have to do when they go to work.
So we have until the end of this
So a couple
calendar
months-
year to try
so a
to get
couple
some
months
money out of the county.
Continue to think
right?
about this, and we continue to help where we can and try to find ways to get them some funding here and there for little things. But I think we're to the point now, we've done that for the last several years. We've done little things here and there, but I think time is time.
So it's also important to note that the University of Maryland, Maryland Fire Rescue Institute, which is where all the entry-level volunteers come through, this is where they will conduct their burns. We have a small burn building now, and if you visit it, you're familiar with it. Very small, 2 burn rooms all on one floor. You literally come through the door and you're in the burn room without much exaggeration. And that's fine for entry-level training. It does not meet the needs of more sophisticated, advanced lines upstairs, multiple floors on fire at the same time, those kind of things. And that's what we're trying to get to. But absent our facility in Bowman Avenue, people are traveling to Frederick, Loudon, Cumberland, or College Park to get these burns in. And I think that's just yet another burden we don't want to put either on our volunteer people. I certainly can't do it with career people because I can't cover the city and send them an hour and a half out of town. Just can't do it. Thank you.
76,000 annually for bonds, debt service.
Yes, $1 million.
I would expect a facility like that, other than maybe some tile replacement at the end of 10 years, to last at least 20 years. Is the experience of other fire departments around the country. It is a much more economical approach than building concrete, a lot of the other things that still have to be lined with burn tiles. So probably at the end of 20 years, those sea containers, they may or may not be a throwaway problem, but it's certainly much more economical than building something that you would expect to last 50 years.
Thank you, Chief.
And looking at capital projects, I originally thought we would go ahead and stop and also take a look at any of the major projects that we have, at least one in each fund. I know we're running short of time. Jonathan, I don't know that, you're not here next week, right? for CDBG, the 14th? So I'm going to try to cover these last two CIP projects, and then we'll kind of reconvene on when we can get back to CDBG and economic redevelopment. I'm hoping that Bill Loon is still back here, because I will admit, I could probably talk my way through just about any page in this book, except for when it comes to the water fund and this Edgemont Reservoir project.
That's not good.
So, has everybody had the opportunity to know Bill Loon, our new water operations manager?
How are you?
So how about just kind of give them an overview of where we are, and I know, I think in a couple of months, there'll be a more specific conversation, but just what we're hoping to do in fiscal year 20, and then, of course, the plans are, I think right now, it would be more in fiscal year 21 with the heavy lift and the extra funding.
Okay, I found out like a few minutes before the meeting I was gonna be filling in for Nancy, so I don't have my budget book.
You're
But
okay.
I'll give you what I have. This project has been slightly delayed because some details that we're working on with MDE and the DNR. We met with our engineers today in a conference call. We're trying to put together a meeting where we can all get together in the same room, all the agencies, and iron out the details. Once that happens, we feel like design will speed up. I believe there's a close to $12 million, and that is still the latest engineering estimate that we have currently, so.
Okay. And again, so this is out at the watershed area in Smithsburg, and more details will come back, and it's been on our radar for a while. There's been updates as we go, and as we get additional information, we'll bring it back. And to his entire credit, he is absolutely true. I think it was like 3 o'clock or 3:10, and my phone rings, and it's, yeah, we can't make it this evening. So yes, about 40 minutes before the meeting begins. So thank you, Bill, for doing this and providing an update.
Thank you.
Last but not least, Eric probably left the building, but we were going to just take a quick look at the parking fund, and really and truly, I know this is a surprise, the parking fund doesn't have a lot of major projects, but we're going to look at one on page 168, and this isn't necessarily because we're looking at fiscal year 20, but again, we're looking at future fiscal year 21, 22.
Yeah, this project has been a placeholder in the budget for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years now, and we continue to just push it forward until we're ready to move forward on it. These numbers are based on a piece of property on Antietam Street that's been assumed to be the location of the third parking deck. That may or may not be true, but that's what these numbers are based on. When you see the land acquisition of $700,000, this is an assessment that was provided to us a few years ago on the private parking lot that's currently on Antietam Street. But that could change if the, as far as the location, again, that's kind of been the assumption for some number of years now. But right now, it's pushed out to 21 for design and land acquisition and 22 for construction.
And so, again, it's a total of about $8 million. And why this is so important and why we're bringing it forward is because when we look at our 5-year out-year projections, we're anticipating that this is all going to start, this third parking deck, and happen in fiscal year 21 to be finished in fiscal year 22, so that mid-year fiscal year 22, it would be finished and open and ready for business. So you'll see those additional revenue numbers when we look at the 5-year projection. You'll see those additional costs when you look at those numbers and projection. And unlike most of the other assumptions that were included for future bonds, went ahead and changed this from a 20-year to a 25-year because realistically, a brand-new parking deck hopefully is going to last us 25 years, and we are well within our debt policy to go ahead and extend one that long. We can actually go out to 30 years. So if we were to do a 25-year bond for this amount, more than likely it's about $450,000 we'd be paying annual over a 25-year period. I will say that, you know, we're looking at additional expenses, and when we look into 5-year projections for parking, which we'll do either next week or the week out, you'll start to see where that impact comes in on that extra annual debt service requirement. But we're not here this evening to talk about location or going to find acquisition. It's just, want to make sure we're hitting the big items so that when we start to look at the 5-year projections, you'll see what really is coming into play there. Is that fair?
Sounds good to me.
Okay. Jonathan, do you want to cover CDBG, just
Thank
your
you.
portion action plan? Do we have time for him to cover that portion? Not necessarily the budget in detail, but just the process, so that's at least covered.
Yeah,
And I can
real
hit
quick.
I can hit the budget highlights next week.
Yes, the action plan process for the CDBG program requires a separate action outside of the actual budget approval. Every year, it's traditional, we'll have a resolution set for mayor and council approval. This month, it will be on the May 28th regular session. And once again, it's correlated to the CDBG budget review and approval. The action plan is a little more in-depth with, it's our annual plan. That's essentially our application for CDBG funding every year. We're required to submit that plan to HUD every year, and upon mayor and council approval, that would then trigger our application for block grant funds, which then are traditionally available to us every year around August or September. So once again, that's just a quick overview of the action plan process. It's available on the website for review by the public. We go through various public hearings each year for the action plan. And we have certain citizen participation requirements that need to be met. There is a comment period. Anyone can comment on the action plan process. And once again, that's all on the city website, and action plans can also be reviewed in person in our office or at the city clerk's office or also at the library. So once again, detailed review of the CDBG budget would then occur next week. The action plan incorporates the CDBG budget along with other various planning documents required by HUD, and that would be set for approval during the May 28th regular session.
And I think the biggest ending comment I think I'll do on CDBG is that at the time that we build the budget, what our entitlement amount could be is anybody's best guess. And so what was included at the time of the budget doesn't necessarily line up with the amount that we just got notice of that we were awarded.
Yes.
You want to tell them?
There's often slight variation between the actual numbers in the action plan. For instance, this year, the budget book is set to print usually February, March. Our actual grant number from HUD did not come in until mid-April. It all depends on where the federal budget process stands for when they actually finally turn around our HUD grant numbers. Once again, this year, it's been more common in recent years where our grant numbers coming in very late. So there is some slight variation, but essentially it's the same core numbers that are in the budget book.
And it's not a reduction.
Correct. This year, it is another slight increase compared to last year. We're set to receive $771,000 for CDBG funding for FY20. Last year was $757,000. So that is another trend upward after about 5 to 6 years of relatively flat CDBG funding in the mid-600,000s.
But I'll come back next week and I'll cover that section, special revenue section. It includes, that section 4 will highlight both CDBG and economic redevelopment, and hopefully we'll have a little bit more time to cover on those topics.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. All right, next up, 335 North John Street discussion. Reggie? Mr. Reggie Turner?
I'm not sure your process, but I have documentation for each council member and the mayor.
Yeah, we could pass it around, it's fine, yeah.
Floor is mine?
Yes, sir.
I'd like to start with a statement from the community. We find ourselves here today in a grassroots effort to preserve and restore the rich history of the Jonathan Street community, starting with an effort to save 335 North Jonathan Street. First, I believe it's important to address how we got here. The ill repair that the Jonathan Street community has fell upon cannot be attributed to one person or organization. It is simply a community failure. More so than condemnation, I am here to bring a message of hope that we can collectively preserve this historic Black community and reap the benefits of celebrating its rich history. However, the neglect of the Jonathan Street community by the city of Hagerstown must be discussed and rectified. More than 30 years ago, the city, through ordinance, named 3 historic districts. And in 1992, the city named a 4th historic district, all while the Jonathan Street community was excluded from the process. Then in 1993, a local historian nominated the city of Hagerstown to the National Register of Historic Places. In that application, no Jonathan Street landmarks were identified in the process. And the mention of the Jonathan Street community was only a throwaway paragraph of incorrect history. Finally, in 2002, the city, through the Department of Planning and Economic Development, had a group from Cambridge, Maryland, conduct the Jonathan Street Preservation Study. Through that study, there were 6 recommendations given to the city to partner with the community based on their findings. Those were: nominate Jonathan Street Historic District to the National Register of Historic Places. 2, nominate Jonathan Street and appropriate sites in Hagerstown to the National Park Service's Gateway to Freedom program, which commemorates sites associated with the Underground Railroad. 3, develop an ongoing educational program of heritage of the Jonathan Street and the African American community in Hagerstown. 4, support efforts to provide local information and history for an annual Black History Month celebration. 5, encourage the preservation of the Dolman Collection of African American history. And 6, establish Jonathan Street as a municipal historic district or a conservation district. And we sit here 17 years later, and none of these recommendations have been adequately accomplished. Recently at a community meeting, a member of this council asked, "Who do I think I am?" I am Reggie Turner, Washington County's first representative in the 50-year history of the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture, appointed by Governor Larry Hogan and confirmed in the Maryland State Senate. And my task for this community is simple. It consists of discovering, documenting, preserving, collecting, and promoting Maryland's African American heritage. So as we begin to discuss plans for 335 North Jonathan Street, let's acknowledge that after 30 years of exclusion and disinvestment from the city's historic preservation and revitalization efforts, this body has given us only 3 weeks to formulate a plan.
This property was deemed to be destroyed in 2008. The day the wrecking ball comes, suddenly, we didn't notify anybody. Matter of fact, a member of the Jonathan Street community who contacted me last week was on this very council when that vote was taken. So to say that we made this decision 3 days and gave you guys 3 days notice on it, just isn't true. How about 10 years?
How about Neighborhood First? Neighborhood First was never notified about it, and they're not here to represent, but I am here.
I'm just correcting the.
I'm just correcting you, Lewis.
No, 10
Ronnie.
years ago, the decision was made.
Are you at the table? You want to come to the table?
No, if this is going to be what we
No, we're
had
not going to let
Tuesday
that
night.
do, no, Lou, we're not going to do that.
Well, we're
But
doing it
I'm going to
right
allow
now.
him to have a moment to be able to I can't tell you why the Neighborhoods First group was not notified that 335 was going to be demolished. I can only tell you that by court order, we're allowed to do it, and the call from the community had been to help get rid of neglected, falling down buildings, and help to establish some kind of a community that can, and it's not just in the Jonathan Street area, it's all over Hagerstown,
So
Maryland.
why didn't you reach out then?
We haven't reached out to any place, any quote neighborhoods first or community in which we have identified a bladed property that needs to come down to the benefit of the community.
Okay,
The
you said in 2008.
Hang on, Ron, hang on, let Lou finish.
In 2008, the decision was made to tear this down. We got finally the court order to do it. This is not the first property that's going down. The first property we just took down was on Summit, right? We had no neighborhoods first meeting to notify people that we were taking down a bladed building. You have to understand that, you know, when Senator Benson came, I've seen, Senator Benson has been here in city council 3 times while I've been here. And you know why she's been here? Begging for us to tear down bladed buildings in the Jonathan Street area. That's what she came to city council for on 3 separate occasions, specifically addressing the building next to hers. The problem is, when I hear Reggie say we have completely ignored the infrastructure of Jonathan Street, while we target a bladed building to take down, instead of saying, you know, there's some mistake, we're being blamed for it. While we're saying it's been the most ignored infrastructure in the city, it has also been the largest infrastructure project in the city of Hagerstown's history. So let's just keep that straight. And that's the 1-year closure of the entire street to redig it.
2009, 2010.
Put in entire lines, put in new sidewalks for everybody. How many CDBG properties have we purchased on Jonathan Street to put up for resale to try to get private ownership in there? I just reject the theory that the city of Hagerstown has ignored the Jonathan Street area. I would much prefer to say that the Jonathan Street area has ignored coming into us and saying this is the history that we need to save until we identify a bladed building.
We're here now, though, and you're talking, and he has 15 minutes. We're here now.
So the purpose of me being here today is to say that we in the community are in a different position than what we have been. We are closer to the resources of Annapolis than we have ever been. Lou, I reject what you are saying, because you've been in this body for 25 years, and most of this has happened under your watch.
I am happy to stand up and say what has happened in the Jonathan Street community during my watch for the last 25 years. I'm happy to do it anytime you wish to, Reggie.
I think we've already laid out what's happened under your watch. I'm not here today to win a pissing battle with you. I'm here to say that we have resources available to preserve this building as a start to preserving the broader Jonathan Street community. We have resources available for us to tell fully the story of those that inhabited and contributed to this community in a way that we have not told them before. There's a win for all of us. There's a win for the community. There's a win for preservation efforts. There is a win for the economics of tourism, with us simply getting the dollars from Annapolis that never come to Western Maryland. We're in a period of time where Governor Hogan has made significant investment here. There is a focus on Western Maryland, and this is our opportunity to get those dollars. So instead of defending your record, I'm asking for you to partner with us, because there is some blame to be accepted all the way around. And 25 years of service and that type of disrepair, and you not on the record for it, that's a problem.
In go back here a little bit, 2006, 2007, Wendy Perry was here, and Commissioner then Del Green, who's now the president of the Maryland Commission on African American History, did a tour of the Jonathan Street area and identified a list of properties to be viewed as worth memorializing, saving. They were the Bethel Street, on Bethel Street Masonic Temple, the old site of the Ebenezer AME Church, the Greater Camford Church, and Watson Funeral Home. On Jonathan Street, it was Asbury Methodist Church, Sportsman's Club site and the site of the Harmon Hotel. Jonathan Place, Hester's, Elks Lodge, 2278, 335 the Chicken Coop, Progressive Men's Club, Calvary Temple Church, Old Barber Shop on the corner of North and Jonathan, and LaRue Salon, which was where Greater Camper Church originated from. That was 2006, 2007. In 2008, and we'll go to Lou's memory on this, it was deemed to tear down 335 Jonathan, okay, because it was already beginning to deteriorate and fall in on itself.
I have a question here.
Hang on, Ronnie. So 10 years later, all right, 10 years, mind you, where a defunct LLC out of Frederick County walked away from the property, has not paid city or county taxes. There are over $33,000 owed to the city alone in city taxes, fines, and fees on a property that is now dangerous, that could fall in to the street, could fall in on someone inside, could do any of those things. And I guarantee you right now, orange snow fence is not keeping anybody out of that building that wants to get in it. So we need to know, are you ready to, come to the city with monies and a plan to save 335 tonight? Because if not, we're going to abide by the court order.
Okay. So obviously, we know that this is a process. Even if the property was purchased through tax sale, we would still have to wait 6 months to get our hands on the property.
At least 6 months.
At
right.
least 6 months. So we're looking into 2020 to getting our hands on the property. We would like to acquire the property. We would like to bring funds to the table. We also would like to use all the state sources available of letters of recommendation that I've given you. Preservation Maryland has stepped forward and said that they would lend us their resources and possibly even their hands in regards to preservation efforts. However, we're in a holding pattern until we can acquire the building. So one question that we have is that with the same order that the city can go on the property and demolish it, can the city go on that property and stabilize it and secure it till we're able to obtain ownership?
I don't have an answer.
Budgetary requirements for that.
I understand that you have budgetary requirements, but I'm looking at a blighted, neglected community of over 30 years. Let's look at the depressed property values of the inhabitants there as opposed to their neighbors in the other historic districts. What have they lost in regards to transferring wealth to their families? African Americans are going to be of negative net worth by 2050. And these red line districts where property values have been depressed and then subsequently gentrified are a prime example of an issue that we're dealing with today. What I'm looking for is a partnership to think outside of how business has been done to improve your relationship with the African American community, utilize all these amazing people that are here standing for this project to rebuild the community. And it takes us doing things differently than what's been done before.
Paul Falk, you out there? Can you give us a little bit of idea of what that property currently, what kind of shape it's in?
Before he speaks, could Dr. Peter Callis speak?
Hello, Pete. Good seeing you.
Good evening, everyone.
Hi, Pete.
And I want to thank you for having the opportunity to speak with you about this particular project. I represent a lot of groups, and one of the groups is the Joint Veterans Council of Washington County. And so I want to take this opportunity to thank all of you for all the support that you've given us for the Korean Monument on Potomac Street, and more recently, the Vietnam Monument on Walnut Street. And many years ago, we were responsible for putting a plaque for a Medal of Honor recipient of Washington County, William Wilson. And we placed it on the triangle out there about 20-some years ago. We had the family there, and we had the Buffalo Soldiers group from Baltimore there. They came up and put a placard out at the Rose Hill. Well, I want to again thank you for all of that. For a little bit about me, I like this community. I was the individual for integrating the schools in Washington County. I was principal of Woodland Way School, and today I had an opportunity to meet some of the former students of the school. We integrated the schools very successfully, and I worked with the principal there, Charlie Hodges, and the various ministers in the community, and I have a strong affiliation with the community, as you well know. I'm a 93-year-old resident of Washington County. My family had a business in downtown Hagerstown, right next to the Maryland Theater. He had a confectionery store, and right on the square in Washington County. Very successful back in the 30s and the 40s, up until the end of the World War II. I am strongly supporting of this mission. I'm a history student. I taught history, and I even spent a couple years in Africa, in Nigeria, representing Washington County Board of Education. And again, if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them. But I do think this is a very fine project. And we are looking forward now. I got affiliated today by accident. I went on North Street, and I met this group, and I went there for one purpose. We want to put a plaque for William Wilson, recipient of Medal of Honor at Martinsburg Park. We have two of them out there, a Wagner and a Will, two recipients of the Medal of Honor, and one placard space is missing. And we want to put the Wilson placard there. And we're going to go create that. And again, our group is we're going to put a placard for Robert Johnson, a Tuskegee Airman, and a teacher in Washington County, out Martinsburg Park, and perhaps on Johnson Street or North Avenue. And so that's why I got real close today. It was by accident, but I read the newspapers, and I've been in Annapolis, and Senator Benson and I were on the same committee. We were down there with Elijah Cummings. Elijah Cummings is a congressman now. He was our vice chairman, and she was very supportive of all of our activities in Washington County. I was chairman of the delegation, and all the legislation came through my desk, and we had sometimes 20 to 30 bills to support, and Mrs. Benson was very supportive of us. And I don't know if she's here today or not, but I read everything in the newspaper about her support. Okay? Thank you very much.
Keith, and you get to talk to another one, as you know, of your elementary school students in Woodland Way. And I was proud to be a player for Bob Johnson, and I was even prouder to be asked by the Johnson family to speak when the rec center was renamed after Bob Johnson. It was an honor to do so. Thank you.
Thank you there, Councilman. A very fine family there. The whole family went to Woodland Way. Many of the professional children were Woodland Way. They lived mostly in the north end of Hagerstown. So we had the opportunity to meet the leaders in Washington County. And we are going to put this placard for, with your support, Robert Johnson, Veterans Day, November the 11th. But the 30th, we have the placard already made for Wilson, and we're ready to put it up on the 30th, which is Thursday. We support the legal, national, acceptable Memorial Day, which is the 30th, not the federal holiday, which is Saturday or Sunday or Monday, whichever the one you want. Okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pete.
Mayor, do you know how much money you're doing for Washington County? I'm a 93-year-old, going on 94, resident of Hagerstown, okay? I was born right where CVS is, right in Cannon Avenue, right where I get my medicine.
Thank you, Pete. Luke.
especially for Pete's edification, how much money do you know is in this year's budget for the Medal of Honor Triangle? Does anybody know?
Don't, Rodney may know.
70,000?
7.
Okay.
Paul, you want to speak to the condition of 335?
Thank you, Mayor.
And then we got to move. Thank you, Pete.
Thank you, Pete.
It's good to see you again.
The general condition of the property, from the outside, it might not look like anything's really occurring to the property. But unfortunately, I was in the property in 2008, saw the conditions of it, and then saw it again in 2018 when we did the warrant at the property. And it is slowly deteriorating, it's demolition by neglect. The roof is missing in sections. The second floor has collapsed into the first floor, and the first floor flooring has rotted and is starting to collapse on the inside. The counter that used to be in there for the commercial space has started to collapse into the crawl space area. The foundation is crumbling and no longer can support the outside wall, so it's slowly collapsing on its own.
Is there any way to stabilize it?
When we had the structural engineer evaluate the property, they recommended demolition.
I just want to make for the record that each one of you have in your email inbox copies
I looked at
from
it
the
already,
Maryland
Rich.
Historical Trust of properties that were in much worse condition than this property that were preserved. So my ask is that we stop playing politics.
We're not playing
and-
politics.
And let's
Rich.
protect this property. Give us an opportunity to rehab it. I'm willing to put my own dollars towards it, Councilman Alshire. Because I believe that it's important. The community believes that it's important. Just as much as you've talked to one person and they gave you one opinion, outside news media, Fox 5 comes to town and gives the exact same opinion that we gave to you last Tuesday, that too many of our buildings have disappeared. Too many.
Well, I would suggest, and this is me, and I brought this up, and if we'd have had the opportunity to meet prior to the meeting, or even tomorrow morning like I offered for breakfast, we have a list that was created in 06, 07, and I believe that we need to focus on those buildings that can be saved right now from any future dilapidation, and make a list and focus on, okay, which ones, where do they fall in priority? That's what I believe that our next step should be if we're truly going to save buildings in the Jonathan Street area that are deemed savable.
Professor Lynn Bowman from Allegheny County is working right now to identify all the buildings that are from that era that have significant history that are in danger. Preservation Maryland has already offered their resources. They will be here at the end of the month to meet with me to talk about a plan of being more proactive. I understand that this body believes that this was a last-minute move by us to create attention, and that was not the case. The fact is that a lot of the history of the African-American community has been underappreciated and reported. Professor Lynn Bowman from Allegheny County has connected more dots of the significance of our community to the world in the past month than most historians have in this area in decades. So each day, for those of you that follow me on social media, we're sharing new revelations about our community that we did not know. We did not know that Madam C.J. Walker came in her touring car down Jonathan Street and hung a right on the Bethel to go see Jacob Wheaton. We didn't know that. We didn't know that the Moxley Band was performing in town as Frederick Douglass came here. We didn't know those things. So these efforts seem behind to you, but you're looking at it through your lens. You're not understanding how this history is suppressed, and it's a jigsaw puzzle to piece it together and find it, and to connect people to families, to buildings, to what was happening. The Jonathan Street community is desolate. It was a thriving community. There were businesses there. There's nothing there. So we're here to stop that process and to start a community-wide effort to preserve it. and we're looking for partnership. I understand you can have one structural engineer, and we can bring in another, and we can have a different opinion. I understand how that goes. I'm just asking for the will of the city to work with us and to explore, can they stabilize the building until we can acquire it?
So you come in and you accuse us of playing politics while at the same time you reach out and say, we want to work with you. Will you explain how we are playing politics?
Yes. At the meeting last week, when we're talking about our individual community needs, you brought up the current president. He has nothing to do with these issues.
I didn't bring up the current president. I brought up, well, you want to let me repeat what I brought up? I brought up, if we don't make it.
It's not important.
It is important.
No, it's not important to these issues here.
I have the floor, my friend. I brought up the fact that if we don't make a change in 2020, the racism in this country is going to go absolutely rampant. I never mentioned our president's name because our president isn't the problem. The people who are believers and the hate that is spewed from there, if it is not stopped, it is getting worse. I tried to respond to the accusation that there is racism in Hagerstown and agreed. And then get paid, I'm playing politics because I agree there's racism in Hagerstown and I agree that there's racism in the United States. And last time I went down to the Jonathan Street area in politics, you know what I said? I don't know why anybody believe what a white person says down here. Okay? So I understand all that. And, well, it is about me.
It's really not about you.
Oh, it's about me.
Listen, okay, all right.
The world is watching.
It's really not. It's not. It's
We
not.
are going to make,
And
first,
accuse us of essentially being racist, it becomes about us.
all right, first off, yeah, hang on, please. We're gonna go, I understand. Shelley, anything from you?
No.
Emily?
Yeah, no, I don't think we have solved this issue yet.
No, we haven't. That's why I'm giving you the floor.
Oh, I don't,
Oh, okay.
what are we deciding?
Well,
I'm sorry.
well, do you have anything to add to this conversation is what I was trying to get to. I mean, Lou had a statement, you.
I have something I would like to add to this conversation. I appreciate your efforts. And I appreciate you bringing these issues to light. So now, how do we partner? I understand the past, so how do we partner for the future? That's all I'm asking, and I don't know how you want us to do that. I don't think there's anyone up here that's not willing to partner and help fix this. There's a problem. We recognize that you brought it to light. We appreciate that. So what do we do from today forward? Regarding this property, but regarding all the other ones as well, because I know Mr. Bachmiller has a list of some pretty significant historic properties as well. So how do we make sure we're not having this same conversation with those properties 10 years from now?
Well, we can form a coalition, a community coalition along with city government, along with the Commission of African American History and Culture that brings tremendous resources to the table. I know that Professor Lynn Bowman is lending herself to this effort. Matter of fact, she is planning who is also a commissioner. She is lending herself to, she has reconstructed the Jonathan Street community back to 1903-04. She's going to be doing a walk here in June that will be announced shortly, June 15th, that will talk about the vibrancy and what the community's makeup was then. So there needs to be a community coalition that partners with you for us to identify all the places. I believe there also needs to be partnership to work through the 5 things in regards to the preservation study that have not been attacked. I would ask that the city.
Well, there's one on there right now that we're working towards.
Right.
You know that, right?
Right. But there's 5 or 6 that have not been touched. Okay? I am asking the city that they scour for grants through Maryland grant programs and wherever that they can to help these efforts as well. I understand that the Jonathan Street community is a part of the Opportunity Zone. Is that correct?
Yes.
So
Yes.
there's a lot of ways that we can partner. There's a lot of ways that we can encourage minority investment here and bring business back. Jonathan Street community is a food desert. 335 was a storefront since the 1890s. We don't have to recreate the wheel. We don't have to just dump low-income housing in the Jonathan Street community. We can bring it back to its vibrance by encouraging business to come there, because you're gonna commit to the investment and partnership the same way that you do in City Center.
Kristen, anything from you? Or Emily, were you done? I mean,
I'm fine with the coalition idea.
Which is what we've recommended prior,
Right.
so.
Kristen?
I mean, just a couple of comments. I know it's often convenient to place public officials, especially ones that you don't have significant lines of communication with on a regular basis, in sort of nice, neat little boxes, based on the sound bites that you might read or hear or get, some knowledge of. And I try to refrain from being placed in any of those, and I think that was part of the mood that I attempted to strike the other evening, and tried to explain to a certain degree as it applies to efforts toward this very simple measure, which is we have heard for so long from all parts of our community of the issue associated with vacant and blighted and neglected properties.
Abandoned.
And some years ago, I made a decision that attempting to take our resources, our limited collective resources, and try and save those properties that are in the least capable condition across this city has for so long exhausted time, energy, and financial resources to the degree that that's all we seem to get done doing. I didn't have an interest in that any longer. My interest instead was clearly to look into each of these blocks in the city in its entirety and say, what is good about those blocks? What is functioning? What is an anchor? What is a catalyst? What can we save, and what do we need to remove before we don't have the ability to save those that are in flux in those blocks that could lead to further deterioration? And so, Lou mentions the Summit Avenue property, which is the first one we did through what I'll call legal process. And the first comment from the neighbor in the paper there was, I've been living here 20 years, and I've been staring at that property for 20 years, and this is what it looked like for 20 years, and I'm so glad that it's gone. And that's a citizen of the city making that comment, reflective of the comments that we get on an increasing level. And I provided a visual of about a 12-page report that staff did of thousands of properties across this city that meet those metrics. And I cited the fact that, we had a group of folks in when we decided to take down the two properties that I believe were associated with the Bester family at some point behind the library, and the Dirty Motel that everybody, I'm sure, with a history of the community remembers, and the Antietam paper, I guess it was, and any number of these properties, the Delta Hosiery that just came down a few weeks back. And not all of them are at the direct hand of the city or at the direct hand of the property owner, but all of them are recognizably deterrents to having a successful and vibrant remaining component of the city. And I never ask one time, not one time, what specific street is that on? What specific segment of the population does that affect? What is the entire history that building has to tell? I don't, because like thousands of other residents that live in this city that tell us on an increasingly common basis, you need to remove that blight. And the only question I would have as it applies to this property, which I am still in favor of demolishing 2 days from now, the 9th, correct? I haven't changed my position on that, no differently than I've changed my position on all of those other properties that I could sit here and cite on all of those other streets. I haven't changed my position on any of those. So when you say to us, we're looking at 6 months, we're looking at the possibility of grants, I said this a week ago. I don't want another almshouse on our hands that the mayor so often reminds us of. So I know that it's 6 months to get to that property sale, that tax lien, but I believe if I read staff's email correctly, then there is the possibility of another 2-year process in which that defunct owner can come back and say, thank you very much for holding the costs on my property. I will pay you and take that back now. And I don't know, number one, that the community that lived there on that particular street any differently than any of these properties on any other street, think that 2.5 more years of watching a property decline is an appropriate action by the body, any more than the gentleman on Summit Avenue would think that another 2.5 years of watching that particular property decline would be an appropriate action of this body. And so that I think is as simple as I see it. And as I said last week, I don't believe that a structure needs to exist to tell the importance of individuals that have made their mark on this community. I don't believe that.
And that is a disconnect that you have with the community.
I have 2 questions in reference to that, Chris.
Sure.
All right. Did that fall under C-Safe? In addition to that, if it didn't fall under C-Safe, how come the city hasn't tried to partnership, as Reggie says, to bring the property up to snuff? I mean, you already have a list of property, as you just
Correct.
indicated. So how come the public isn't aware of the properties on Jonathan Street that you're getting ready to dispose of? Like the Masonic Temple on Bethel Street, that I talked to Mr. Bachman about 3 years ago to try to get into it so that we could physically try to structure it so that the roof doesn't cave in. I'm just asking questions.
Yeah, I have no issue with partnering in a process to do that.
With a property
But
owner
we're
that
having a
wants to do
discussion about a
That's
property
different.
that has been in a defunct condition for 11 years without any discussion to that effect, that only now, I mean, and I said this last week, I mean, I feel like folks are conveying this message that I simply woke up yesterday and said, you know what I'm gonna do today? I'm gonna tear down this property.
No,
You still didn't answer my question. I said, did it fall under the
case.
category of C-Safe when you talked about 2008 when Carolyn Brooks was involved? That's what I'm asking you. That's when all this stuff allegedly was transpiring to do this and do that, but the public was never aware of that, is what I'm telling you.
Never.
Was you under the regime then to where this decision was made? I know Lewis was.
Well, I mean, I wasn't on the council in
Thank you.
2008. I was a commissioner.
So I can appreciate your statement and your concern, because I understand you have a job to do, and so no one's knocking that. And I understand we just didn't wake up and realize that there was an issue. I think one of the problems is we just woke up and realized what we had. We just found the treasure. And that's the concern that we have on this end. And when the gentleman spoke, Mr. Callis spoke when I met him earlier, the amazing thing about it is that he's talking about Tuskegee Airmen and Buffalo soldiers being here in Hagerstown. Tuskegee Airmen and Buffalo soldiers talked about all around the world. And we have parts of those history here in our country. At one point in time, they were diminished and minute, and no one talked about them. But when those things come to light, we try to shine a light on them. It's really bigger than our community, and you have an opportunity right now, in this moment, sir, to speak beyond just you and beyond just us. And that's what I believe Reggie just simply asking, that we pause for a moment, which is a word that I got from Keisha, that we simply all just pause for a moment and realize what we're dealing with here. Let's don't be so haughty, and you know, a man's ego is about this big in the reality, but it's the easiest thing that's bruised is a man's ego. And once a man's ego is bruised, he'll choose to take a side on what he wants to do, and he won't move from it. I'm simply saying, let's just stop and pause for a moment. I appreciate the fact that you asked the question, Emily, what can we do? We keep talking about what I want to do and what I want to do. And I think Emily brings up a good point. What can we do? What can we do about this opportunity that we have to save some history that's bigger than just Hagerstown, but happens to be born in Hagerstown? Imagine the people that will come from all across the world, all across the United States, maybe just to hear about a Tuskegee Airman, and then find out about the Moxley Band. We have a unique opportunity right now, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, if we just take a moment and pause and breathe and talk about what's really important.
Austin, what about you? Anything?
Yeah, I'd just like to say, Reggie, I think I've complimented you several times on social media and the other night. I think the action you've undertaken to do the historical research and to start this process, I think is a very positive catalyst for the city. And I think there's a community that didn't know their heritage. There's a lot of people that had no idea that that building that's falling in was ever anything other than a building that was falling in. I support fully what Emily was saying, that let's get together, let's put a coalition together, let's decide how to preserve this history, let's preserve, and now that we've got some recognition in the community, in the Jonathan Street community, that we have something here. And yeah, there's what was torn down for Bethel Gardens, you'll never see that again, but it's gone, and we can't do anything about that. The thing that concerns me right now, I know Steve Bachmiller has done some research on some buildings also, which I think can be incorporated into this, and some that have some very significant historic possibilities for restoration. The thing that concerns me about this specific building right now is just from the city's standpoint, if a child goes in that building, or if teenagers go in that building, and as I think the mayor said, that snow fence isn't gonna stop anybody who wants to go in there and explore. And now that it's become, it's on the newspaper, it's on WDVM, people are talking about it, I think people are gonna want to see what's in there. And I know one of the engineers that went in, when he first went in, he fell through the floor up to his knee, I think. I'm concerned what happens if somebody gets hurt in that building. Now that we know, we've done studies, we know that this building is dilapidated, and it is a safety hazard. Maybe we've let it go too long. It's like a cancer, you ignore it, you don't treat it, and you let it.
All right, so anyway, I believe.
I'm saying that letting the building's disease fester without treating it has done it in. And possibly if we had started 10 years ago, or the other thing is, we've got to look, as a community, the Jonathan Street community was raped. It was raped by slumlords who came in, these LLCs that came in from out of the city and bought up low-priced properties with some kind of a scheme of doing something which was probably not good. And then decided, well, it really is gonna cost too much to retrofit this thing, and they just let it sit. And they hid behind their LLC, and they didn't pay the taxes, and they didn't try to develop it, they didn't try to build it back up, they didn't do anything, and they just ran away. And there's still, we know the gentleman's name down in Frederick, who is the managing member, and, he's still there, no skin off of his back. No skin off his back right now if some child walks in that building and falls through the floor.
I can appreciate what you're saying about the LLC.
Hang on a second, Reggie. Go ahead, Luke.
This is the last thing I'll say. Two things. When I go to mediation, I say to people all the time when we do our divorce mediations, the best way that we can mess this mediation up entirely is talking about yesterday, because if you all start talking about yesterday, you're going to just get into a pissing match and we'll never get on till tomorrow. I think we talked a little bit too much about yesterday is my problem tonight. I will say, this is my attitude, I may be the only one who has this attitude, but we have a whole lot of buildings on that list to be demolished. Let's take the funding on this building and demolish another building. Put a fence around this building. I have no doubt whatsoever What the outcome of this building will be a year, 2 years from now, I have little doubt in my mind. But this is not the only blighted building in this town. I, for one, would have no problem voting not to take it down, put up a fence, and let Reggie do his thing and come back to us in a year or two and tell us where we're at with the building. The city does not have the funds to stabilize it. That's not going to happen, but I could certainly see putting a fence up around it.
So we're gonna block a sidewalk for 2 years. We're gonna do that.
That seems to be what this community wants, is what I'm being told. We have other places like,
Please, please, no more, okay? We're gonna move on. We have to, okay? So, hang on a second. So, again, I'll say, are we gonna block a sidewalk for 2 years plus? Because it's gonna be more than 2, we know that. It's gonna be 6 months after the tax sale, plus whatever. Are we gonna do that? Are we gonna hope that that building doesn't fall out into Jonathan Street and hit someone? Are we gonna do that?
I thought that's what we were being asked to do, but now I'm being told that's not.
I would like to hear.
If you go down and speak to the elders on Jonathan Street, they actually keep the people safe right there.
Yeah.
If you go down there and talk to them, because Box 5 went down and talked to the people on Jonathan Street. If you go and talk to the people that sit outside right there, they'll tell you how they keep the community safe and how they're tired of the city tearing down their history.
Thank you, Takesha, thank you.
That's what we're
Reggie,
getting down to.
you had said that other buildings have been in worse shape, that were struck, that were able to be, I guess, stabilized.
Yes.
So.
I saw
is
some
there-
pretty nasty ones in that presentation that you sent me.
I'm sorry?
I saw some pretty nasty ones in the presentation that you
If
sent.
you check your email, you'll be able to see.
So my question is, do you know if that process, have they evaluated this particular property? Or do you know, like, what it would take if these other ones were in worse condition?
We have not had a structural engineer in there yet. There's a structural engineer that is working in Allegheny County on Henry Louis Gates' family property that we have made contact with to see if we can get another opinion in regards to that. But the difficulty is that we have no access to the property to do anything from that standpoint. But we are still working our resources to be ready. And the only thing that I would like, I would like Lou to be on the record to tell us what he believes the outcome is going to be in 2 years, so that we can revisit his words.
I would think the outcome in 2 years would be one of two things. Either the property is going to start having serious restoration, or it's going to be torn down. But in 2 years, one of those two things is going to happen to it.
Okay.
All right, so, thank you, guys. Reggie, thank you. I'll tell you what we're gonna do. We're gonna stay in contact, and we wanna make sure that, you're part of whatever coalition, that we can put together through the community and elected bodies and staff people, again, to pinpoint some of these properties that.
And can I just mention one other thing on the list? We need to have a viable solution to preserve 417 North Jonathan Street. In your 2002 preservation study, that is deemed the oldest building in the Jonathan Street community. Most of you know that it's a log cabin home under the siding. That home was the headquarters of the Colored Laboring Sons and Daughters Beneficial Society of Hagerstown in the late 1800s. Jacob Whedon was one of the founding members of that. That is very important to us.
Is that Mr. Davis' property?
Yes.
You know, he wants it torn down, right?
No.
Well, he's paying for the demolition of that building.
We will work with.
Okay, you work with Mr. Davis. And my suggestion is you reach out to the defunct LLC guy in Frederick County and work with him. And maybe you can figure out some kind of a plan.
But if the LLC is defunct, there's nothing that one individual member can say on behalf of a defunct LLC.
Well, someone owns that property.
Yes, in a defunct LLC, not the individual members.
Rich, you had mentioned at one point in our conversations that there were stabilization funding from the
Yes.
state of Maryland.
Yes.
So would that funding be available to stabilize this property for this
There very
amount
well-
of time?
There possibly could be emergency funds that can be gathered. We lost a little bit of steam, so the funds that MHT had, I'm not sure are still available.
Due to a fiscal year or due to just timing of,
Just doing what was left in the coffers for the fiscal year,
okay.
okay?
So when could someone, you, I would imagine, look towards getting that
Well,
stabilization
the
funding?
trick of that is that if we don't have ownership of the property, those funds would not be released for us to do that for a property that we or you don't own.
Right. So we're back to 6 months before,
Well,
well,
we're-
back to tax sale time, and then 6 months, and then,
But if we listen to what Councilman Heffernan said, that the community has been raped, and he talked about the defunct LLC. But what we're not mentioning is the history of redlining of that community, which originally depressed the property values. The disinvestment in that community, the filtering of the drugs to that community that everyone outside of the community went there for. Those type of things have shaped that community to be where it is. What we're asking for is a partnership. And this is a start. This is a start to rehabbing the entire community. But we have to lay a marker down somewhere, and we've decided to lay it here. And why did we do that? Because the Moxley Band formed here in 1854. The three Moxley brothers, two were enslaved and one was free. They went and fought for us. They joined the U.S. colored troops. They performed in Maryland. They performed in Virginia. They performed in Texas. And in 1866, they came home and were the pride of this community. And in 1879, they performed when Frederick Douglass came through here. And they continued to serve the community. And as they started to pass away, Edgar Moxley was born in 1878, the son of Robert, the head of the band. He continued the band his entire life until he passed away in 1953. Edgar lived at 335 North Jonathan Street from 1946 to 1953. The back of the house on the first floor was the band room. The family retrieved drums and cornets. We're in the process of talking with museums to see the value and the fact that they very well could be nationally displayed. The city of Hagerstown has funded efforts to highlight the Moxley Band, but can't fully tell its story. The Jonathan Street community can. So what we're asking for is a partnership to go outside how you normally do business, to go against the naysayers, and give us an opportunity because we're in a different place in the last 50 years.
you know I love going against the naysayers.
Well, this is your opportunity, because you're gonna have to answer to your friends on social media.
I don't have any friends on social media, trust me.
He will. This is an investment that you're making. But the potential payoff is tremendous, right? Because 2-3 years from now, if this fails, you can blame Reggie Turner and you can make me the face of this failure, right? You can be done with me because of that. However, if you make this bet and you win, then the community wins. And the rest of this rich history that we are uncovering is going to be told. And more tourism is going to be here as a result of that. And you're sitting in a seat that has a chance to affect that change and do something different. And I ask you to do that.
Thank you, Reggie.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, guys. You're on. We're gonna, I don't know, we're gonna move forward on demolition or not? I mean, we have to make a decision.
That's the point of being in the middle of this conversation. And now all those folks that came here for that decision are leaving the room.
Well, I was trying to get a decision.
We can call them,
Yeah.
send them back.
I'm not sure.
I don't know what, I mean,
I don't know
there's
what
5
just
people
happened.
sitting here that have
Yeah.
5 different opinions.
Come on back.
I mean, I still don't know how it's gonna be stable. I think that's the whole thing.
I think we have to do what Lou says, it has to have a fence around it.
Fence.
We have to prevent anyone from getting anywhere near that building.
If you got 3 to do that, you should do that.
I mean, there's other properties that we could concentrate on while we have this property to be able to, do exactly what Reggie's saying, to figure out what the partnership looks like. I mean, we can't just say, like, we're gonna create a partnership. We all agree, there should be a partnership, there should be a coalition, right? But at the same time, we have to be able to stabilize We have a list of other properties that we could demolish. So why can't we just move forward with the other ones? And figure out what that partnership looks like?
You could. There's one on my street that gets started.
Huh?
There's one on my street that gets started.
If that's what you want to do.
I mean, I don't know, I'm worried about the safety part.
I don't think it's gonna be a matter of blocking that sidewalk off for 2 years, because I think they'll be able to come
I do
to
too.
a realistic appraisal of what to do with it.
Thank you.
Within a couple of months. That's what I think.
We're sorry, we just don't feel like that there was a conclusion there.
I don't think anybody said to the folks in the room what we actually are going to do from this point forward.
Right.
I think you heard 5 members of council sort of express 5 varying opinions, and the objective that I like to leave these discussions with, or at least you having some awareness of what the consensus is from this point forward, not you leaving the room, then we reach a consensus and 2 days later, the building's demolished. You know what I mean? And you not have that clarity, or the building's fenced, and you not have that clarity.
Yeah.
And, so I mean,
I
I've
think
been.
right now, we have 2 people who are willing to say, let's secure the building and give these folks, I use the word 2 years, Reggie, because I think in 2 years, I do believe there's going to be a solution, but I think the reasonable solution will take far less than that, because I think it'll be far less time than that to figure out what can or should be done.
And I
with the
think you
building.
need to define for the folks in the room what secure the building means.
Fenced.
It's
Has to be fenced.
Like a more sturdy, is there a more sturdy option than that fence?
Once the structural engineer looks at it, there may need to be some frame. If it's in danger of falling on Jonathan Street. then
Well, if
it's
that's the
gonna be-
case, then we may just have to take it down. I mean, if it's literally can't be stabilized for under
Well,
a
I
couple
think
$100,000.
even Reggie would agree that's a different conversation if it can't be stable, because you want to get a structural engineer too, correct? I mean, I'm pretty sure if that additional structural engineer says we can't do it, that's another
I think-
conversation.
But they need access, they need city assistance to get access into the building.
We can coordinate that.
Paul, how do you feel about that? Having,
We got an administrative search warrant, and I would defer to Jen on some along those
Jen.
lines.
About access to the structure?
non-city personnel.
Under the auspices of city
Right.
personnel, not just
Correct.
going in.
Not just
I think
going
you
in.
tell somebody you're gonna pay their 33 grand and they'll let you walk right in the front door. That's just me. I could be wrong.
That community's owed more than 33 grand, so I don't really take the jokes. I'm not here for that.
Right.
I mean, you know
You
how I
got,
feel.
you got a
Jen.
majority of
Yeah.
folks that have an
Okay,
interest in
let's
fencing.
defer to council. John,
I guess I need to explore that a little further. Are we talking about
Having a structural engineer come in,
a structural
Yeah.
engineer, a construction crew?
well, a structural engineer come in and look at the building.
First,
To
right.
say whether
Oh,
it
you
can be
took a second
stabilized,
opinion?
yeah.
With
Yeah.
Reggie's direction, for your structural
your
engineer.
structural engineer.
Yeah, but
from
under the
Cumberland,
direction
right?
of
Or is
city,
that-
it was going,
I think
yeah,
we can handle
yeah.
that with an administrative warrant.
It'd be a specialty structural engineer that's done these projects before.
Mhm.
And that would be your choice,
That'd be Reggie's decision, who,
Would that make you feel, would that make you feel comfortable, Reggie? to-
That's a start.
Okay. And again, I just think that there's a list of other properties that we can, you know, this is a very important project and a very important property
and
to
listen,
this
this is
community,
not,
and
not the first building that was a danger to our community that was left unsecured for way too long. I can think of one with a 4-letter name, starting with an M and ending with a P with an E and L in between it, before we finally secured that building. So that would give them.
So the consensus is to secure the building with a fence
Well,
that's.
you have
mo-
2 people.
That's, okay, okay.
there's 3, Austin and.
Okay, so yeah, we got, all right, okay.
And then
We'll
Wayne.
secure the building with a fence that's more sturdy, that actually deters people from trying to get on, into the property. And then we'll wait for Reggie to, let us know when his structural engineer is available. And then we'll work it out to be able to get into the building with that structural engineer, and then get a report from him, and then go from there.
And
Is that what we wanna do?
That's,
well, and I would think that, I'd like to add that due to the deterioration of the property and the danger, that time is of the essence.
I've
So-
already been in contact with all
Okay.
hands on deck.
Just keep us posted and
I'll
when.
be making phone
when
calls
that'll be.
tonight as soon as I leave you.
Okay.
fine.
I feel
All
like
right,
this
there
is
you
more
go.
of a conclusion.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming
Yep.
back.
All right. Strategy for sale of city-owned property, 117 South Locust Street. Let's get this out of the way. Don't make your grass, John.
So we still have a property now under our city ownership at 117 South Locust Street. In late 2018, the mayor and city council authorized the city take the property back through a deed in lieu of foreclosure. It's a property that was formerly in the CDBG home ownership program inventory. The city, at that time, when it was sold to that original homeowner in the early 90s, the city held the mortgage on the property. So in roughly 2016, that homeowner vacated the property, and at the advice of our legal counsel, our only option at the time was to take the property back through the deed in lieu of foreclosure process. Since it was acquired and rehabilitated with CDBG funding, we've checked with our HUD representatives on this. It still remains a CDBG asset, meaning when we sell the property or dispose of the property, any funding or proceeds from a sale of that property would go back into our local CDBG fund or CDBG program. So that funding would remain CDBG program income. The nuance here is, since the previous homeowner had occupied it as a low to moderate income occupant, it has satisfied the CDBG income restrictions. So we have a few options to look at when we would look at a strategy to dispose of this property. We could sell it as is right now through possibly the competitive negotiated sale process to possibly a homeowner, possibly an investor, and there would be no CDBG income restrictions on the next occupant. Any proceeds from that sale would once again go back to our CDBG program for us to utilize within the CDBG budget. We could sell the property possibly in a more targeted RFP through a competitive negotiated sale, maybe to a nonprofit type entity, to maybe focus on a potential partner like Habitat for Humanity or the Housing Authority's nonprofit HRC. We could also look at taking it back into our CDBG home ownership inventory, utilizing CDBG funds to fix it up somewhat, and then selling it through the CDBG home ownership program. I would note that the property does have some interior renovations that are needed. I'd say fairly minor. It did have some vandalism that occurred sort of in that transitionary period between the owner vacating it and the city actually acquiring it through the deed in lieu of foreclosure process. Some of the plumbing was vandalized, so there would need to be some minor rehabilitation activities. So once again, presenting those options to the council and seeing what direction you would like us to take when it comes to getting this property hopefully back in some type of private ownership.
Since there are no restrictions.
I would say just sell it, however.
Yeah, I mean, I would
Through
do it.
CNS as is, through competitive negotiated sale as is.
Is there any advantage to using CDBG funding to complete the repairs and then sell it as a, under the home ownership program, would we be?
Only if you could use program income money, right?
Typically, yeah, I think typically that would try to lead it down a path that's more conducive to home ownership. But once again, it can make it a little more complex because introducing CDBG funds again require that income restriction.
Oh, okay.
So there's
Yeah.
definitely some pros and cons to almost each step. I think the quickest way could potentially be the CNS process, just selling as is.
And then the funds, generated by that sale would go back into the
Yes.
CDBG pool for.
Us to utilize for any CDBG activity that we would decide on from there.
Appropriately.
Would they be restricted to regulations too?
Yes, restricted to regulations, but still under our control.
Yeah, I think that's, sell it.
So as is through competitive negotiated sale. Because once again, you could still have a homeowner that's looking to buy it, or it could be an investor. But it definitely, it definitely does need some work on the inside to get it back to a habitable status.
Cool.
Okay, we will look to get it on the CNS list
Thank
and
you.
see if we can sell it.
City Administrator, any comments?
I have no comments.
Lou?
I think our city administrator, for his first formal meeting, has come forward with the best comments of the year from the administrator, yes. That's it.
Austin?
No, I hope that tonight, for whoever's left watching out there, that, you know, it's difficult to sit in this seat and feel like you're being accused of something that you had no hand in doing, but I'm hoping that going forward, we can establish, you know, through. Good luck. Well, through a civic pride in that neighborhood, if we can turn something around, but, that's all I got.
Kristen.
And I'm not gonna waste a lot of breath on this next comment, but, you know, when I asked the consultant this evening, you know, we didn't get a copy of the report, there's nothing. At 4:45, and as I stated to the citizens, those that are bothering to watch, very clearly, I had zero information in our packet, zero information provided before the consultant's brief presentation on the stadium. At 4:47, we got an email from the consultant with the information. So it's finally, you know, 2 minutes after we get it, it's finally available for the public to look at through that third-party process. And, you know, I have no doubt that there'll be additional communications on this item between now and our next meeting. But the reality is, you know, I don't know how the MSA process specifically works, but it sure feels like, as an elected official, that you're being railroaded through a process that you have no participation in, no control over, but you're simply just sort of providing the funding to. So if the state wants to do that with its money further along, and that's how it operates, it's certainly welcome to do so.
So you're okay with going to phase 2 then when the time comes?
That's what the state wants to waste its money on, sure.
Good. I don't have anything either. We're adjourned. Thank you. Be here at 7 o'clock. Good evening and welcome back. Need to get a motion to go back into the 70th special session.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
And we're back in. We have a public hearing, fiscal year 2019-20 tax rate. And then we have a public hearing for the fiscal year 2019-2020 budget. We'll open the public hearing on the tax rate. Michelle?
Yes, good evening, thank you. So for fiscal year 20 budget, the constant yield notice anticipates slight growth in both real property excluding apartments as well as apartments only. The fiscal year 20 budget includes a real estate tax rate on real property excluding apartments at 1.002 per $100 of assessed value. That is the exact same rate as what we are currently charging in fiscal year 19. The fiscal year 20 budget also includes a separate tax tier for real property on apartments category only at a price of 1.032 per $100 of assessed value. And again, that is the exact same rate that is currently being charged in fiscal year 19. By keeping our tax rates for both of these categories the same, we will see an estimated increase in revenue of approximately $135,000 across all categories for real estate.
Okay, fantastic. All right. Any questions for Michelle from the council before I open it up to the public? Nothing? Do we have anybody from the general public who wishes to either speak for or against the tax rate for fiscal year 1920? Seeing none, Michelle, you want to close this out?
Yes, can we please close this session? It'll stay open for another few days, and then May 14th, we'll have the introduction of the ordinance. May 21st, we'll have the adoption, to be effective July 1.
Thank you. Okay. Opening the public hearing on the budget for 1920.
So the fiscal year 20 budget for all of the city of Hagerstown across all of our funds is a proposed total of $143,162,625. That is a slight increase when compared to fiscal year 19 budget by approximately $2 million. Again, this encompasses all of our funds. The governmental funds, which includes the general fund, CDBG Community Development Block Grant Fund, other special revenue funds, and our general funds capital improvement projects. Subtotal is $65.4 million. All of our enterprise funds, which includes the electric fund, water fund, wastewater fund, parking fund, golf fund, and property management fund, total $67 million. And our service and trust funds, which are our workers' compensation insurance fund, our health insurance fund, and our dental fund, are $10.7 million.
Any questions for Michelle from the council? Open up the mic to anybody who wishes to speak for or against the proposed budget for fiscal year 2019-2020. Seeing no one, Michelle, we'll close it out.
Yes, and it will remain open for another week, and then we'll come back again next week, May 14th, to do an introduction to ordinance to adopt, to intro the budget, and then May 21st, we'll do another adopting ordinance for the fiscal year 20 budget, with it to also be effective on July 1.
All right, we'll close those public hearings out, and next on the, for business is the approval resolution, construction escrow agreement with Hagerstown-Antietam, 453 West Trust.
Mr. Mayor, I move the mayor and council approve a resolution approving a construction escrow agreement with Hagerstown-Antietam 453 West Trust. This agreement establishes a construction escrow account in the amount of $20,000, which satisfies a condition of a settlement agreement and mutual release that was approved on March 25th, 2019.
Second.
Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. No further business of this administration this evening, so we're adjourned. Thank you.
Yes.